Well, China's leader has called Donald Trump to congratulate him on winning the presidential election and to offer him a little advice on trade. Now, we'll never know the exact tone of the call, although Trump's spokesman says the two men did show mutual respect. But consider this. Trump has for months criticized and threatened China because he believes when it comes to trade, China cheats. Is it all about to get very serious, as our Sukri reports?
Donald Trump rode to victory in the race to the White House partly on his promise to get tough on China. Over the course of the campaign, he repeatedly hammered home the message that he would punish it for underpricing its goods. One of the measures he's proposed is levying a punitive 45% tax on Chinese imports.
We have a $500 billion deficit, trade deficit with China. We're going to turn it around. And we have the cards. Don't forget, we're like the piggy bank that's being robbed. We have the cards. We have a lot of power with China.
The actual figure is rather different. America's trade deficit with China was about half that amount, coming in at $258 billion for the first 9 months of this year. While still large, that's down 6.3% from the same period in 2015. Now that Trump has won, both sides are sounding rather more conciliatory. In a phone call, Chinese President Xi Jinping congratulated Trump on his victory.
The facts prove that cooperation is the only correct choice for China and the United States. At the moment, China-US cooperation has crucial opportunities and enormous potential.
But it's China's semi-official media that tends to report what the country's leaders are really thinking. The Chinese Communist Party-linked paper, The Global Times, said in an editorial, if Trump imposes a 45% tariff on Chinese imports, China-US trade will be paralyzed. China will take a tit-for-tat approach then. A batch of Boeing orders will be replaced by Airbus. US auto and iPhone sales in China will suffer a setback, and US soybean and maize imports will be halted. China can also limit the number of Chinese students studying in the US. Trump has accused Beijing of deliberately undervaluing its currency to give it an unfair advantage and blocking investments by foreign companies in China. A full-blown trade war between the world's two biggest economies is by no means a certainty at this stage. But if one does break out, there are likely to be very few winners. Azhar Sukri, TRT World.
Well, Steve Bannon ran Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and the president-elect has repaid the favor, appointing Bannon as his chief strategist. He's also selected the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, to be chief of staff at the White House. Now, a number of candidates are being considered for other key appointments, including the Treasury Secretary. And we're going to go to our Editor-in-Chief, Craig Capitas, who is in Paris for us now. Craig, I may have mispronounced Reince Priebus's name, but this is the whole point. Our international audience actually don't know much about him, and they don't know much about Steve Bannon either. Although we do know that they are, both obviously Republicans, but one is from the mainstream, the other is even further to the right. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it's Reince rhymes with pints, Priebus, and thank you for promoting me to editor-in-chief. I appreciate that.
Anytime. You can perhaps repay the favor.
I will. Well, that's what Trump's doing down at the White House right now. Yeah. He's repaying the favors. And he's bringing in Stephen Bannon, who heads the ultra-right-wing, conventional wisdom says, racist and anti-Semitic news website called Breitbart. These are very controversial. And what these two particular appointments have created is that perhaps it's no longer a delusion to believe a change of form in politics is a change of substance. Usually it's all the same. Trump wants to change things. And the biggest change he's doing right now here as we're in the middle of, COP22, the environmental conference down in Marrakesh, is he's appointed a fellow by the name of Myron Abel to be in charge of the transition team at the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, that is like appointing Jack the Ripper to be the principal of a girls' school. This guy is a climate denier. He was subject to a motion of censure for his statements in front of by the House of Commons in the UK. And he is kind of the devil of climate change, to Al Gore being the saint of climate change. This has perhaps scared more people than any other appointment so far.
Craig, in terms of policy, how does Trump deviate from Obama? It's massively, but specifically, if you can.
Deviating from policy?
How he treats China and India.
Well, how he's treating China and India is, we have to see. You know, let's not put the proverbial cart in front of the horse here like a lot of other people are doing. Mario Cuomo, the former governor of the state of New York, said you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Now, Trump has made a lot of outlandish statements. Everyone freaked out that he's going to deport, 3 million illegal immigrants. Well, you know what? The Pew Research Center says that Obama deported 2.8 million illegal immigrants.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. Okay, Craig.
During
so
his
this
term.
this is interesting. A lot of people would not have guessed that. Craig Kapitas, editor-at-large in Paris, thank you very much for your contribution. We're going to go back to our top story now, and that phone call between China's president and Donald Trump. Anne Lee joins us now from New York. She's the author of What the United States Can Learn from China and adjunct professor of economics and finance at New York University. Anne Lee, thank you very much for joining us on Money Talks. I just wanted to start with something we heard in our report by Azhar Sukri there, where we heard Donald Trump saying, China is ripping us off and we have a lot of power. We have a lot of power with China. Do you agree with those two statements by Donald Trump?
Well, I would say he needs to be more nuanced, and when he's going to be negotiating with China. The power that the U.S. has is really more in its military. China has great economic power in Asia and is the center of a lot of supply chains. The U.S. is much less so in that regard. So the U.S. actually is much weaker from an economic standpoint. Certainly Trump probably wants to change this dynamic, but this can't happen overnight. And if Trump decides to engage in some kind of trade war, many U.S. corporations could be finding themselves on the losing end of that. And so I think Trump will have to be very careful in how he approaches this. Yeah,
when Trump says China is ripping us off, and he's talking about currency manipulation and devaluation and so on, do you find that particular point is at least fair?
I would say that argument is old, because the manipulation that China's had more recently is actually in the U.S.'s favor. China is actually trying to prop up its currency to make things more expensive and more stable, actually. If they let their currency free float, which is what traders in the currency markets have been doing. They've been trying to push the currency down. That would actually make China's exports even cheaper. And so actually China is working towards the U.S.'s favor in terms of trade. And so Trump's argument actually is no longer relevant, really. It was true maybe a decade ago, but not true today. And so he needs to understand that things have changed, and I don't think that's an accurate portrayal.
Okay, Anne Lee in New York talking about the Chinese-Donald Trump relations. Thank you.